we know that the world really doesn't like the carnivore diet. The powers of the world, anyway. To use a biblical term, the princes and principalities, they don't like the carnivore diet. And they don't like keto either. They want you to eat carbs. We know this. We're used to being told that saturated fat, oh, your arteries must be turning to plastic, must be getting full of cholesterol. Oh, all this evil stuff by people who don't know that cholesterol is used for hormonal signaling and cell health and other things, and that your body runs most efficiently on a high saturated fat diet. These people don't know this because they've been miseducated by our broken food system. So we're sort of used to it. We almost sort of laugh it off. If you're on social media and you mention carnivore somewhere, or a carnivore group starts getting infiltrated by vegans or others, it's almost a joke. You have fun, with the bantering with these people because it's so silly. But what if I told you now that the powers of the world are coming after intermittent fasting? Yes, apparently not eating as often as they would like will send you to an early grave. According to the most trusted food establishment out there and the most trusted media out there. So you get this headline from the New York Post, which illustrates our point. Intermittent fasting diet could actually send you to an early grave. Published just after Thanksgiving, when people's eating habits that day are much more likely to have that effect on them than skipping a meal now and then. And what's the takeaway from the article? Well, they tell you in this article that intermittent fasting could cause cardiovascular problems. Eating your meals too close together and then having a 20-hour window or a 16-hour window of not eating, where the window is closed, basic intermittent fasting, could send you to an early grave. I hope I don't have to tell you that is utterly ridiculous and on its face nonsensical. But for some reason, the food establishment, the nutrition establishment, really wants us on the eating 5 to 6 times a day to quote unquote ramp up your metabolism, even though it actually has the opposite effect when you do that. They want us on that. And they want us, of course, on the standard American diet. So the clean version of the standard American diet, where you eat healthy processed foods and you shop mostly on the outside of the store, outside edges of the store, but you're getting, your 11 servings of bread and grains a day, and you're eating low saturated fats, even though that's probably causing mental problems for people, brain damage and things, because your brain is made of fat and all these other things. They want us on the standard American diet, and they want us to eat frequently. Why? Well, let's talk about where does university funding come from for these research studies? Because most of the stuff is done by universities. Yes, there are independent research organizations out there, and they do publish as well. But most research that you see when someone cites a study, it's coming from university researchers. So if you're one of those who, like me, doesn't generally trust, the college establishment, the university establishment, and professors because of their biases and all the other things, I spend a lot of time. I have a PhD. I spend a lot of time in a university setting. I understand the problems more than a lot of people do. If you're like me, that should be a problem for you. But in general, the problem really is this. Most of the biases coming in the natural sciences and in the social sciences when it comes to research comes from who's funding the research. So when you see a study like this, you don't even have to try to dig deep into who funds that department, because you already know who does. You may not know if it's Monsanto or Sodexo who funds them in particular. It's always big agriculture, like the pesticide lobbies, which is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, or it's often big, like the actual industrial food companies that will fund these organizations, or it's like the big agricultural combines that will do it. And that begins to be a problem when you're talking about things that are often associated with good health. Like, for instance, we talked about how often it is that carnivores will often go and only eat once a day, maybe twice a day. It just naturally seems to happen. Why? Because it turns out fat and protein are pretty satiating, especially saturated fat and ruminant meat are very satiating. Some of you may have noticed that if you eat chicken, that you may enjoy the chicken that you're eating, that you've done well to cook it, you've cooked it properly, you've done it you've made it so it's very flavorful. It's not filling. For whatever reason, you get hungry like an hour later, 2 hours later. When you eat chicken, a lot of carnivores have noticed this. But red meat is high in saturated fat, relatively speaking, and is nutrient dense, and so it's very satiating. Consequently, it's easy to eat only once a day or twice a day for a lot of people. Give you a little anecdote. Friday, I had a bunch of shrimp. I had shrimp like at like 4 in the afternoon. I was not hungry the rest of the day, but the next day I woke up feeling like I'd fasted the whole day. Like I'd done a monk fast. I hadn't eaten anything. It was ridiculous because shrimp isn't nutrient dense. Still delicious though. But my point being is the funding for these places comes from organizations that want you eating frequently. They want you eating carbs. They want you eating their meat substitutes, their protein substitutes. Remember, I'm sure you've noticed walking around the grocery stores these days that a lot of the packaged food will talk about, oh, plant-based proteins inside. Well, why is that a selling point exactly? It shouldn't be, but it is because of propaganda. Advertising propaganda specifically. We are being sold a lie, and a part of this lie is coming directly from the big food companies. So it's a grift of sorts, right? It's dishonest. They do it through funding studies that reinforce their point. And so intermittent fasting means you're eating less. That's what it means. At the end of the day, it's a diet program designed for you to eat less. You know, if your eating window is 4 hours, okay, so you have a meal and then you have a second, maybe smaller meal at the end of it. It's what usually happens for anybody who's done a 20 and 4 split for intermittent fasting, you're eating less. It's just how it works. You're not snacking during the day. You're not having, your 3 square meals a day. You're not eating 6 times a day like these people tell you to. It's money. And they hate intermittent fasting. They hate it. Why? Because intermittent fasting, it turns out, works pretty well to get you to lose weight, and it gets you most often off of a lot of low carb or high carb foods. Although it's not always the case. I mean, anybody who's ever found themselves in a intermittent fasting social media group, well, you'll be surprised to see, maybe if you haven't, that most people there don't do low carb. Well, there's a lot of people who intermittent fast. And I watched a video on Facebook the other day of a guy who broke his intermittent fast at one of those Annie pretzel places in a mall. I was a little surprised to see that. Like, why would you, be health conscious enough to practice intermittent fasting and then wolf down a bunch of carbs to break your fast? I mean, that's just fasting 101. That's a bad idea. But anyway, we're talking about organizations that want you to eat junk. They want you to eat frequently, and they want you to eat things that aren't satiating, so you eat more of it. It's almost as if it's institutionalized obesity. Intermittent fasting is a great way to, at the very least, restrict how much you're eating, simply because you don't have that much time to eat. And they come out against it, claiming cardiovascular problems. And they do that while the article, it sprinkles in these really shapely actresses who are all big fans of intermittent fasting. Because, as it turns out, there's some sex appeal going on used to sell this diet. And it's coming from very high-profile people who are very good at using that to sell products. And now they're doing it to help people correct their health. I guess this freaks out the nutritional establishment a little bit because, again, like my wife was told when she was pregnant and on borderline with gestational diabetes that she needed to, cut down her sugars a little bit, but she needed to eat a whole lot. She needed to eat often, while also giving her a roadmap for eating like 1,200 calories a day worth of food, which is, how do you eat often and only 1,200 calories? But point being, your nutrition advice is always eat frequently, small meals, eat frequently. It seems to be like that's still the accepted norm, even though that will just keep your blood sugar elevated all day. It's madness. It's absolute madness. And they're coming for intermittent fasting now, the same way they tried to come for keto, although that didn't seem to work. And now they're trying to cut off carnivore at the same time. Carnivore is harder to sell. It'll probably never be truly mainstream, but it is becoming more popular. So keep an eye out for more stories like this. In fact, if you see more stories like this, like anti-carnivore or anti-intermittent fasting or anti-keto stories in the mainstream media, send them to me, please. My email address is on the screen for you. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot as well. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore, and thanks for your time.